Hello, this is Kristen Kosinski, and I am here with Klaus Wittkuhn and Roger Addison, and we are here for our fourth installment of our series on performance improvement. I am a coach and a consultant, and I have a background in working in international development. I started and ran an organization called the Samburu Project, which was focused on the provision of clean drinking water as a foundation to development, and I worked in Kenya, northern Kenya. So, Klaus, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Klaus Wittkuhn. I'm from Germany, which is probably easy to hear. I have a background in consulting. This is probably 35 years or something like this, mostly in industry, but about 20 years ago, we also started working for USAID, and the German counterpart is GIZ. So ever since, we have done a number of projects all over the world in many different sectors.
Great. Roger?
Hi, I'm Roger Addison, with you here from Northern California. I live in South Salito. I've been a consultant for probably over 30 years, although I have worked for private industry as well. And I've had an opportunity to take my skills sets all over the world, either through actually consulting or as a tourist. So I do like to combine my work and my love of country and meeting other people in other parts of the world. So that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years. And I've been doing some projects for USAID as well.
Excellent. So we're going to jump into a presentation, and then we'll have a little a conversation. I also am from Southern California, so we've got two Californians here with you.
So everybody should see this now.
Yep, that's good.
Great. So in the fourth part of our series, we try to add one additional element, and to understand why we do this and just focus on this, we have to go a little bit back in time. I prepared a little summary of what we did during the last 3 sessions. And the starting point was this one, that we said, this is the current situation, how not only USAID, many donors look at situations. And then we introduced the idea, like, if you think in those levels, you can think like the lower you are, the simpler it is, and then it gets more complicated, which also means when you talk about analysis in those fields, if you are further down, it needs less analysis. Sometimes it's even obvious what to do. And the more complicated it gets, the more analysis it needs. So there we said, this is basically how systems work today. We introduced then local capacity development based on HICD and said, now the thinking there is not that what you saw here on the first one, like the systems level is the highest level. You know, we introduced the notion then that we said, no matter what level you're on, it's systems everywhere. Now, once you think that way, what you have then is less attribution error, like you attribute causes for problems less to people, what we talked about in the third sessions, and you get more options for solutions. And the odds for sustainability are higher. I mean, projects can fail with this way of thinking, you know, also, it's not a silver bullet, but you get a considerably better overview and you get more options.
You know, one of the things I found with this summary, Klaus, is this goes across all industries. You know, yes. I don't care where you come from, because I've used it in basically all my projects that I worked on, and especially when you look at HICD, that was out of it came from studies that had been done through ISPI, the International Society of Performance Improvement. So they basically took the model that they had developed and introduced it to USAID several years ago. So these models have been around for a long time and worked across industries, across cultures, right?
It works across industry, not only industries, association, whatever
Right,
you.
yeah.
We even did it with a church.
Mhm.
I did it with the suicide prevention group here in the United States too. So
Wow.
it can work across different cultures or different organizations as well.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing is, if you look at how people did it in different organizations, different from the industry you are in, sometimes this is really eye-opening because you are not that stuck in your current situation.
Right, yeah.
So anyhow, we will come back to agriculture also. So this is how we started, and so this is the current situation. We add the systems perspective, we gain some benefits by doing it. And we also said, you can do it and take an engineering perspective. You can engineer performance. The only thing is you can't touch performance directly. You have to touch all the factors that influence performance. But if you think of an engineering perspective, this little map that you see here, we do not go into the details, but this is nothing but a map that outlines the major factors influencing human performance. Like an engineer, when you build a machine or do something similar, you have templates to follow, you know what you do, you know what you look at. And this is what we had in mind when we said, if you want to analyze or design performance, you can take an engineering perspective also. Now, this is not agriculture, but it's the perfect illustration for something you run into in many, many projects. And therefore, I love it so much. What you see here is this is a Second World War airplane, a UK airplane. And they put together a team, a bunch of engineers and mathematicians, and they try to find out what can we do to strengthen the airplanes to ensure that more of those airplanes make it back to their base. And what you see here is all those dots are hits they found in airplanes. So you can see, where the dots cluster, the airplanes had the most hits. And then the first idea was, okay, now we have to strengthen the airplane there because we can see there are the most hits, which is kind of a trap that you run into in many projects. You can see this is the visibility trap. Because finally, one of the mathematicians looked at it and said, guess what, guys? This drawing is based on the airplanes that made it back. The airplanes that did not come back probably were hit not at those spots.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, that's a good
that's
one.
really fascinating.
That's really
therefore,
good.
No matter what industry you are in, I think this is, and no matter how good your tools are, there is always something in the back, or there might always be something in the background that is invisible. And imagine they would have gone with their first ideas. They probably would have strengthened the wings and the cabins, making the airplane heavier, more difficult to maneuver, and finally having even more casualties.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I love that example. That's a great example. I love it.
Yeah, it's a little caveat saying no matter how good your tools are, you always have to consider there might be something in the background that you don't see.
You can optimize. You can optimize a system and still have failure.
Yes, which is another argument for, let's say, inclusion, and diversity. Sometimes you do not know people. You do not know what people can contribute. Because you do not know what you do not know.
Right. I think it's just idea. Somebody looking at that, maybe sort of not in the field of aviation, would say, "Oh, wait a minute. Are these the planes that, that we came back?" And so it's just sort of obvious that somebody would say that who maybe not be so close to the problem.
Might be.
Yeah.
Okay. So this has a little kind of fun illustration. Therefore, I love this example also.
Yeah, it's great.
Now, coming back to this one, we already talked about, no matter how good your tools are, always have in mind there might be something invisible in the background. Now, this is what we basically covered during the first 3 sessions. I would like to take a look at this slide now, because the idea that you go from simple to complicated and that you go from, let's say, little analysis to more comprehensive analysis is not wrong, but it only covers part of the situations that we face. There are situations that are not only complicated, but they are complex. And this is quite different then, because complex situations do not lend themselves easily to analysis. And if you look at agriculture, there are so many factors involved. Like, you have multi-level from plot, farm, community, state, region, in a national, you know, if you think of in a big system. If you look at it at the highest level, you could say, yes, we have an issue with how do we provide food for a growing population worldwide, but it's not only about food. Agriculture is a livelihood for millions of people. Those are economic issues. And agriculture has a huge ecological footprint. You know, all those things kind of mix together when you are facing issues in agriculture. And then you have multi-stakeholders, you know, not only the farmers and, you know, the administration and government, then you have consultants, you have all kinds of donors. You know, it's so many factors involved, and they work together in a way that is hardly predictable. So no matter how comprehensive your analysis will be, analysis is probably not the best way to find out how to make changes in a complex system. You know, it's probably more about trying to understand how does it operate, because those systems are grown. This is not like a machine. In a machine, you could say if a machine has a performance problem, you look what part is broken, you fix the part and the machine runs again. But those systems are not machines. So it's not simply a broken part. They have patterns that evolved over time. And the results you see are the results of this system. You know, this is how the system works. So there is nothing that is broken and you simply can change. You have to understand how those patterns unfold. And then you might slowly get ideas, what could be done to change those patterns? You know, and then you would not analyze a specific problem, but you look much beyond the problem to understand those things. This is quite different from what is done nowadays.
This is an interesting example. I was asked to be part of a team that we were going in and working with one of the Caribbean countries who had a large island that wasn't being utilized. So the government said, well, why don't we put in a cattle industry? So at that time I lived in Texas and I was attending a large university. And they said, well, why don't we bring in some people from Texas who know about cattle? So they asked us to go in, and the island was beautiful, and it's one of the larger islands in the Caribbean islands. But we said, you know, first of all, do you have the people who have the knowledge about the cattle industry? Well, no. Do you have the land? Will the land support a cattle industry? They never thought about that. Then also, you have the transportation system that's going to be able to basically take the cattle off so that means another system had to be in place. So they started looking after systems after systems after systems, and it became not only complicated, but it became very complex. And so that's how it starts off. It was very simple. Let's bring cattle industry in, but it went from complicated to complex. So that's one of the things that I saw was actually working on the ground was really quite interesting. By the way, it was a beautiful place to work. I loved it.
Yes, this is an interesting example because because it's nested systems. In complex systems, you might further down, you might find simple ones also or complicated ones.
Right.
It depends very much on what you have to solve. Now, coming back to this is basically the last part we wanted to add to the ideas that we outlined during the 3 sessions we already did. And we said, yes, look at it. This works in many situations, what you see here. But then finally, there is a group of situations that is complex. And then all the things we outlined here and we showed here do not really work anymore. It needs a completely different approach. This is what we are convinced of. The only thing is, working in a way that we showed, like you go from simple to complicated, you go from less analysis to more analysis, and the idea we can understand it, we can identify the gap and fix it. This is kind of hardwired into not only USAID, into many donor organizations. So this thing, if you really want to approach this complexity idea, this would mean, this is this little blue box on top of this, on the bottom of the slide, is it would entail a number of changes because you would have to write RFPs differently, you would have to manage projects differently, you have to disseminate all this know-how, you probably have to hire different people for some jobs, you ask different questions. What you get there is, for sure, is inclusivity and diversity. Because to understand all this stuff, you need all the different perspectives. So this naturally comes to the table, but it would mean a lot of changes. And I do not even know whom to talk to because I do it a little oversimplified right now. And anytime I talk to people about this, especially people in the field, they basically agree because they can see this, they experience it every day. Still, they are part of this hardwired system, and then everybody, no matter whether you are consultant, USAID employee, member of a government of a country, everybody has stakes in the system. Mm-hmm. Everybody somehow complies. And this leads to cheating. Set up a system that cannot deliver and people will cheat in the system. Now, this is not an agriculture, but because Roger used to work at Wells Fargo long ago. But Wells Fargo is the best example for it. Those unrealistic objectives they came up with a few years ago, this led to cheating all across the system. The system could not deliver on this. And you find the same, not all the time. I mean, there are huge achievements in development work, but you also can see there are cases where the hardwired system leads to cheating.
Right, because people need workarounds. People are always trying to work around whatever the system is.
Yes, they need workarounds.
And there'd be consequences because there was, the organization had to pay billions of dollars in fines because of that. And they also lost a lot of customers. So it's a matter of you can basically cheat your way out of success. And that's been written up. And I mean, you can just follow the newspaper and articles and see that one unfold.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the last element we wanted to add. We are certainly not the only ones thinking that. And you find this thinking in USAID also. This is not completely new. We simply try to outline it in a specific way. Still, I find it difficult to connect with people who have the same thinking, and especially with people who could really make changes in the system. Because otherwise, you are always kind of something borderline.
Yeah.
It somehow does not really fit in.
Right.
So if somebody is listening and has an idea whom to talk to and who else is interested in those questions, we would be happy if you contact us and continue to have such discussions.
And I think that is when you say you really have a diverse group of people working for you that come from different parts of the the world, different thinking, and include them into the whole process, you come up with a better product. So I just think that it's just a matter of, at least that's what I learned along the way. The more people I have involved, they see it from a different way sometimes.
It seems like to me, in listening to this presentation, that like what is beneficial would be to come at it from a place of absolute curiosity, and sometimes what that requires is not knowing or forgetting that you know anything, but just coming from this, a new with no perspective, so that you can just get super curious about what's happening within the system. So in some ways, like, ignorance is bliss in a process like this, which, is interesting why to bring in terms of diversity and inclusion, like bringing different people in that can look at it from a fresh set of eyes.
And I think you said something very interesting about being curious about it. Just everybody has their own perspective on how they're curious about something. So I think that in analysis, if you're sort of curious about what's going on, you can ask those questions about,
Yeah.
I wonder why, I wonder what's happening. So it's a matter of that. And again, we always talk about in your analysis, if you're solution neutral, that you sort of don't bring a solution in mind, you also can open up your thinking that way too. So it's just another way of looking at it.
Mm.
Yes.
Yes, I think this curiosity idea is a good one, because the question would not be, and so in those cases, the question would not be come in and analyze the problem. The question would be come in and try to understand what the system delivers right now and why, like patterns, because you could say systems are perfectly designed to deliver what they deliver, and take out the notion of intention out of design. Those big systems grew somehow.
Right. Yeah,
But you could look at it, this is kind of a design that has grown, but this design delivers specific results. And it's not like there is a failure or something. It's the way it is, it delivers. And this is what one has to understand first.
I'm going to stop you sharing just so we're all back together on the full screen.
Yeah.
One question: in a complex scenario, would low risk experiments be a viable way to go?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. You want to try, the more things you can try out under different circumstances, the better off you are. Because basically you're developing a hypothesis, saying, I wonder if this is going to work. And then you apply, your thinking to that. So yeah, the smaller steps you can take sometimes is very, very useful in what you're trying to accomplish. At least that's from my experience. We try to go in and change the whole system at the beginning, and often that's doomed to failure too.
Blow things up.
No, I think what you said, Kristen, is key. This is absolutely key. You have to come up with some kind of risk management.
Right.
Otherwise, you might run much too high risks.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So,
And that idea of just being super curious about what's happening.
actually,
I think a lot of times what happens too is, I think in any kind of job that we do, when we get hired to do something as consultants or employees or whatever, it's like there's this thing that we have to act like we know everything, when it's like, no, like if we come in without having to feel that way, if we can come in of like, I don't know anything, like show me and teach me, it's such a fresher perspective.
And I think that's one of our colleagues talks about being curious. Harold Stolovich says, you got to be curious about what we're trying to look at. And I think that's a very good way of saying it. Some other people come up with that same idea as well.
Yeah.
So the more we can be just curious about what's going on, ask those questions. The more questions you ask, the more interesting I get. I know I'm working with an architect, one of my performance architects, and he's going on and doing forensic analysis about buildings that fail. And so it's just a matter of all the questions he has. I wonder why the building failed. And it's amazing the things that you come up with of all the different things that around it. So it's another application of from another industry.
Yes.
Of just asking the right questions and being curious about it. I wonder what's going on.
And that goes back to the plane example.
I love the
right.
I love that plane example. That is so good.
Because it's obvious how they thought of it initially. It was obvious, but then it was like when you get a little more curious. It's like, well, what about the planes that did come back?
Well, and that's the idea of asking the right question. And the right question at that time, what about the planes that didn't come back? And somebody said, oh.
Yes. Yeah, and that's all about, they were probably being very curious. So we're going to have to wrap it up so we don't go over time. You want to say one more thing, Klaus?
Yeah, I just thought, I'm convinced there is a connection between the more stupid you look at the beginning, based on the questions you ask, the more impact you finally will have.
Oh, that's perfect. Let's leave it on that. So please share your comments and questions below this. If you have questions for us, please reach out. We're happy to answer them. And thanks to everybody for coming here and listening and engaging, and everybody at AgriLinks for making this possible for us to do this.
Yeah, thank you all. That was great. I loved it. Loved working with you all too. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. It was fun doing it.
Right.
And the time quickly went by.
Yes, it sure did. Thank you.
It did go by quickly, yes.
Okay. Thank you so much.